So basically, in this particular situation, what I was using it for was just to sort of see if I could figure out if that rotational symmetry existed here, and it did, right in this region. Okay. And I used the GAN box to help myself figure out like a price target. So I ended up doing like 50%, 50% up to this point. Just a brief recap of how I set up this structure, okay? 50% to here, 50% to here. So 50% horizontally, 50% vertically. I did that because in this particular region over here, that's the way it kind of played out. So it's a way of measuring time and price. All right. Once I did that, it was pretty easy to see, yeah, there's some kind of a rotational symmetry where you get like a bounce, bounce, drop, bounce, bounce on the other side, run up. And it ended up timing out this particular run up like to the day, like to the minute. I mean, it was very, very close, and it picked out the top of the price target. It didn't, however, all happen within the box. It ended up going outside the box and hit the price target much later. So I was like, that's kind of weird, you know? But the rotational symmetry was there. If you're somebody that's like not sure what I'm talking about, when I say rotational symmetry, I'm talking about like a clock, basically, okay? You have in the middle like a pivot point, okay? And the pivot point represents 50% left, 50% up, roughly. So 50% from the bottom, 50% horizontally, like time-wise. And in a clock, if you've got your hour or minute hand, right? Let's say you took this right here, and this was all on top of this minute hand. And you took this whole structure and rotated it around to the other side of the S-curve. What would happen? Does it make sense? So when I'm talking about symmetry, the idea of symmetry is basically that you look at a mirror and you can tell that your face is the same on the left side as it is on the right side. The reason I'm not saying it's perfectly symmetrical is because most people would look at this and say, Booksy, it's not perfectly symmetrical, right? And you would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's not symmetrical. It doesn't mirror itself like that. And you're right, it doesn't. If you just take this and you mirror it, that's not what it looks like, okay? At all. But we're talking about rotational symmetry, which means that this idea that it's copying itself, but it's copying itself what? Both horizontally and vertically. So you flip it around and there you go. Okay? So it's not only a mirror to the left side, it's a mirror to the right side. And then another way to look at it is rotational because it's technically doing it from a pivot in the center. Capiche? All right. Now, you don't have to believe me about this and say like, oh, this is the way it's going to happen. But what I will say is this. This is the bridge that we saw. We saw that it exited with rotational symmetry coming out here. We are now in a situation where the same thing seems to be occurring on a macro scale, where we're coming out of the bottom on the larger bridge that exists, okay, right here. So we're in a fractal standpoint, you're in the exact same position on the macro scale right now. So that tiny little area right here where we saw that rotational symmetry is now playing out on a macro scale right here. And what's really fascinating is I went in, I did this, I said, okay, that makes sense because I never understood exactly what was going on these bridge exits, but I knew that there were these two big pullbacks. One big pullback, two big pullbacks. There's at least two. Sometimes there's like an apparent third, but at least these two big ones, right? What's really crazy to me is I did the diagram. I messed with like a lot of other things. I looked at this guy over here back in August. I've been looking at this a lot. You can even see it here. You can see the rotational symmetry right there. You see how it's on the top here? It's almost the same as the way it was on the bottom. Even the way, see how this combs up at the end? It's almost the exact same. And I've been talking about this for a while, how like this was like 50% almost to the dime. I mean, it's like right there, where it's like exactly 50% of the run, exactly 50% of the height. I'm a little off on the bottom there, but you get the idea. Here, I'll draw it again. You know, it's pretty wild stuff. So it's like, this is super structured S-curve. It's almost perfect, like a 50-50, and that's what we were looking at. So I'm like, all right, if this is the way that it comes out of the bridge, then it should be measurable, right? 50-50 here, and we would need to see what? A big middle right at the 50%. Not surprisingly, if you go to, that was the wrong one, the price targets, and you look at where would the bottom be, there's two different bottoms. There's like the actual bottom, which is way over here, right? And this leads you to basically, if you go to like the 50% marker, basically like halfway between this little eyeball guy. So not exactly perfect, right? So that one doesn't work super well, but there's another one, which is actually the place where the iteration stops shrinking, which is like right here, roughly. And this one, if you go right up to where we expected the height to be, so this is like the actual move, right? So here the iterations are shrinking down. This is the other side of what? Remember, this is the place where the breakout happens on the diamond bottom. Right here is that diamond bottom line. So this is the actual breakout point for the run. This is when it starts meeting the expectation of the exit trajectory. Look at where the 50% marker is between here and our target trajectory area that we got like by a number of things. And it's right exactly where this thing was on earnings. That's a complete perfect 50%. Now look at where the 50% marker is. The halfway point. It's at this $22 region, right? And not surprisingly, look at where we bounced when we pushed up over top here, like right on it. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic. Like I'm making a lot of assumptions one into the other, but they're all kind of working, right? And then I did the rotational symmetry of this, and I was like, whoa, that's the same. All that needs to happen is this needs to push up to the top. So I was just looking at this S-curve, this inner one. Yeah? And said, whoa, all that needs to happen is this needs to push up to the top, and it would be just like this guy. And then I was like, wait a minute, I already had a bigger S-curve. Why don't I use that? So then I took this thing right here, and I just visually, like in my brain, just mapped it out how I thought it would look. I just looked opposite and said, okay, this would come back to here. This would come back to there. This might not come back down to 2176. It might come a little higher. Not going to guarantee that it's going to come to 2176, but 2176 is the equivalent value as this guy, which is where it went before on the push up. So I was kind of like, well, maybe, you know, if you look at the relationship between, this really is higher, by the way. It's kind of like, it's hard to describe, but this is essentially like floating between the two. Does it make sense? Something like that. If you look at the relationship between this peak and this peak, it's roughly like lower, so it's like kind of like that. Makes sense? So this would be higher on this side. It's probably not going to be exactly 2176, probably a little higher. I'll find out at some point what the value is. Maybe it's 2220. I don't know. There's a lot of values here. The point is, I did the rotational symmetry. When it got done, I was like, I should probably do a Gann for this, because it would make sense that this would fit into a Gann chart. And then this is where my mind starts getting blown up to smithereens yesterday, and why I just like peaced out and went to bed like 3 hours early, because I was like, I can't do this anymore. So first I did the inner Gann box, which is not appearing. So here we go. Super slow. I did the inner Gann box, and I was like, wait. This has to work, right, if it's correct. So I went back to the lower thing, and I was like, where's the low down here? Where would my perceptive high be? And the one I picked out is 3431, because I was like, well, it's the only number that I know for sure is a support here right now. There are other targets that I got. I got like 3333. I've gotten 3734. I've gotten a lot of different targets. I've gotten 39. But for this run, I'm just looking at 50% up, 50% up, right? So basically, this doesn't work, because you can see that this value is a linear value. So this is a 50% but it's not showing me like half and half percent-wise because it's a logarithmic scale. It's showing me half and half on like a, a different term. So visually speaking, you kind of have to do it manually, but you can see that the 382 is like the visual half for this, okay? And that places it right where it should be, and when you do that, you notice, look, it hit right on the visual halfway point, which is right where that macro visual half was that we were looking for, blah, blah, blah. This becomes like the perfect halfway point down here for like a percentage move, so on and so forth. The point is, it works really well, and if you look at where it's been tracking very significantly close to all of these speed lines right here. All right, and it followed these guys out. I mean, it was like perfectly on a speed line. If I were to draw it like 1-to-1, there's the speed line right. There's actually right between them. You can see that like it kind of created a little channel here, like that. There it is. That's an actual speed line. I just put it on there. It comes back down. It bounces on this guy, this speed line. It coasts up. It kind of respects a couple of these on the way up. When it comes down, it essentially tracks on this guy, this speed line almost perfectly, this trajectory line, remember? There you go. So I'm looking at all these things and I'm thinking to myself, well, I mean, it looks pretty good, but I guess anybody could like do this stuff and it would be confirmation bias. What I need to do now is check and like, look at this guy, holy moly. Look at that one. Look at that line. Dang. I was like, what I really want to do is check the bigger one, right? Because the little one's fine for this move, but I want to see if this makes sense on the bigger one. So things get kind of gobbledygooked here. I know. And you're looking at that like, there's no way you can possibly see that, Booksy. And I was like, you're right. There's no way I could possibly see it, which is why I went to sleep early. Because I'm only a person. I was like, does not compute. I was like, I can't do it. But look, I actually mapped these to these speed lines again. And again, it's like exactly there. Look at this, the way it hits these lines. It's perfect. It literally follows this to the T, this structure. It's almost embarrassing how like perfect it is. So I basically just went back and like mapped it just to speed lines. And I was like, huh. So this is the one I landed on yesterday, right? I was like, look at this, right? And look at where this would land when this breaks out. This center speed line right here. See the thicker white one? The more thick. The thicker gray one, rather. Look at where this pullback goes. It goes right back down to this like 24 level right here, this intersection. Now it could come beneath it, but the point is this has definitely been respected. Right? There was a gap here for Pete's sake. It came down and touched it, rejected off. It's coasted up it. It's essentially like one of our trajectory lines. It's been super respected, right? And now it's like slightly beneath it. But look, this is where it spiked up to, pull back. This is where we got this push up today through it. Now it's possibly going to pull back, retouch it, so on and so forth. This trend, this downtrend. So even on the macro, they're respecting a lot of these speed lines. So say speed line one more time. Just say it one more time, Booksy. You get the idea. All right, I think you get the idea anyways. So I went through and I just messed with this yesterday and it was like, wow, 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 wee wow. This is so cool, neato, superb. And then the big kicker. Right? I got done with this, and y'all are like, this is BS. There's no way this is true. Look, I got done with it. I went back, and I looked at the structure, and I about pooped my pants. Because there's no way that someone's going to songify that. I about pooped my pants. There's no way that I could have done this, built this with rotational symmetry and a Gantt chart, and manufactured that shape any more perfectly than I did. It's like abysmally close to exactly what we would have expected to see. I mean, exactly. what we would expect it to see on a bridge exit. Do y'all see this? Because I can't unsee it now. And now my brain is like, what? How in the world? No wonder this looks so weird, right? No wonder this shape is so bizarre and doesn't make sense. It's a rotational symmetry shape. If they took this guy right here, made it a top, right? And then you've got this flat top over here and a flat bottom over here, which is exactly what we're drawing on this guy. So it's like the same shapes, right? They're drawn the same way. I'm using like the way that I'm showing this white line, these are respecting some speed line on that Gantt chart, all of them. The ones that go down are like a little less respectful sometimes because they pass from one to another. They would have to in order to drop, but they do respect them. And that's your S-curve. I don't know if I can draw it on here, but that basically is like right there. And I just messed up. It won't let me do it. You don't get the idea, right? You get it, right? I think everybody understands it. Yeah, I think you understand it. You don't need my silly southern accent. It won't let me draw it. Okay? For some reason, it won't let me draw my S-curve. It really wants to straighten the S-curve. There we go. It's just rotational symmetry. That's all it is. I always thought this was so like unique, you know, as a top, but it's just this guy rotated around, flipped twice.